Wasatch Report, shooting straight on everything from prepping to politics.
Well, good morning, everybody, and welcome to the Wasatch Report. I'm Suzanne Sherman. I will be your host for the next hour here on the Cerberus Radio Network, where we defend liberty and freedom from the flames of tyranny. Today is Tuesday, June 11th, year of our Lord 2019. We have a great show lined up for you today. Joining us first at the top of the hour is Ben McClintock, our good friend from Defending Utah, who does amazing work on behalf of us trying to keep Utah free. It's an uphill battle, and he is working tirelessly. We appreciate his efforts. We'll be bringing him on in a few moments. Justin Spears, good friend of ours as well. Congratulations to Justin for having some very well-written articles published, both by the 10th Amendment Center and FEE, the Foundation for Economic Education. Really big feather in his cap. We're going to be talking to him about articles on the debacle of what we call the public school system. So he'll be here for most of the hour after we have Ben on. Want to remind you, you can follow us on Facebook, facebook.com/Cerberus Radio Network. Want to thank the new followers and the new members of our fan page, CRN. If you're listening live on YouTube, want to encourage you to join the chat, weigh in. You can also follow my page on Facebook, Suzanne Sherman's The Wasatch Report. Those of you that are my friends on Facebook, send me messages as well during the show, and we can address those on the air. We have a substantial leap forward in going to our acquisition for the ability to take phone calls. We had a very generous donation, so keep it up and we will get the equipment so we can take your live calls. That'll be also it'll facilitate the process also for getting a much larger variety of guests. Not that I don't appreciate the ones that I have on today, but it'll make it very easy for them even to join in via the telephone. Also, you can find all of my articles, blogs, and our radio shows both on YouTube and SoundCloud at my website, SuzanneCSherman.com. Go there, hang out. All my articles from the 10th Amendment Center, Abbeville Institute, the American Conservative can be found there. Blogs also, I'll get a new one out coming very soon. Got a few things I'm kicking around in my little skull here to get to you guys. I hope you'll enjoy them. There is a donate button. If you donate, again, we will put that money towards getting you quality content, making it easier for you to join in and have your voice be heard with us here on the radio program. That being said, Jeff Johnson is producing the show, also my co-host. How are you today, my friend?
Good. Usually you don't come to me this early, so I was kind of surprised. I'm doing well, though. Thank you.
Well, I tell you what.
Finally stopped raining.
Yeah, we had Mike Meharry on yesterday. If you missed that show, go to our SoundCloud. That was an outstanding show where we covered all sorts of privacy issues. And I wanted to bring you in a little bit earlier, Jeff, because we were on such a tear. You hardly got to be heard at all yesterday. So,
well, the one time I wanted to be heard, I kind of interrupted and I got my 2 cents in there. So I was good.
And we didn't even need to give you change. The good thing about being the producers, you could always mute everyone's mics when you really want to be heard. But that being said, ladies and gentlemen, I want to introduce you to, if you're not familiar with Ben McClintock from Defending Utah, again, I sung his praises when we started the show. I want to encourage you to support Defending Utah. You can hear how you can reach them when I bring him on. But he's got a really important story to share with you. Ben, let's bring you on. How are you today?
Great. Good morning. Glad to be with you. Appreciate it.
Great to have you back. Let's get a little background. I have here in front of me, you sent me a PDF file, and to me, it looks like we're trying to get parents' rights strengthened when it comes to medical issues with their children. Quick background story about your daughter and how is she doing, please?
She's doing great. So it was a year ago in June, a year ago this month, that she was life-flighted to Primary Children's Hospital in Salt Lake and diagnosed with leukemia. And after she got out of the first emergency, she had 2 blood infections, and she was in the PICU for 2 weeks. And there was a lot of different things that happened there that showed that Primary Children's, it's thought of as this premier hospital, but it is It is not. It is very backwards. They have a lot. I mean, they just have a lot of issues. And so we wanted to, after we got out of the emergency situation and we could actually kind of calm down and figure things out, we wanted to go elsewhere. And so they immediately called CPS. And CPS starts this investigation. We're like, oh, whoa, hey, wait a second, what's going on here? We didn't realize we didn't have the right to figure out our own health care for our family. And now that we know that it's against the law to actually do this, fine, we'll come back. Well, just let's just figure this out. And instead of saying, okay, great, you're doing what we told you to do, they continued to try and take away our daughter. They made up. The CPS agent lied, claiming on a court affidavit that he witnessed us starving our child. And when we
I saw pictures of her eating like a little piggy in the hospital.
Exactly.
Ice cream. This kid was a happy little kid.
Yeah. It was ridiculous to say. I mean, how do you? What was he hanging out? Watching our house looking in the windows, saying, "Oh my goodness, she never ate." I mean, even if that was the case, it'd be ridiculous because it's obviously not true. And so just completely perjured himself. And then when we turned the tables around and got a lot of pressure from a lot of different circles, they backed off. He actually left a voicemail, and which we've saved, saying that he has no evidence against us and that they've dropped those charges. And so we actually filed. We actually looked into finding out. Can we file charges against him for clearly we have all of the evidence we need to prove that he perjured himself. And what we found out was that when acting in the office of an agent of the government in the state of Utah, they are immune from prosecution from doing those types of things.
So clearly we have no incentive for them to be honest and forthcoming in their dealings with people like you, who, by the way, I as you recall, my son was having a minor surgery that was elective, and I got to meet you for the first time there. And I told some friends of mine afterwards, I saw a man with the fear of God in his eyes. He had the look on his face that his daughter was going to die. And then here comes the government to make things even worse, if that's even possible. And time when the government has the opportunity to be kind and compassionate, they just want to dig the knife in and twist it. I've been to Children's Primary. It is absolutely a beautiful facility. But I tell you what, one thing I noticed when I was there, admonitions and warnings everywhere about how dangerous opioids are.
Oh, yeah.
Be an advocate for your child. You know what they sent me home with? A bottle of opioids for my kid. Many I gave him, 0. I better watch it now, because now the state troopers are going to come here and say, oh, does she still have it? We better get it out so it doesn't get in the wrong hands. They're the reason it's getting in the wrong hands.
Or they'll go after you for the fact that you just admitted that you didn't give it to them.
Right, exactly. Speaking of not giving it to her, you were accused, because your daughter was doing so well, of not giving her medication.
Absolutely, yeah. And that's exactly what happened. They're like, wow, her numbers are really good. She looks healthy. You're obviously not giving her medicine, and that's a real problem.
We can't have healthy kids. So what is your solution here? What did you come up with? Now, is this a proposal, or is this been signed into law?
It is. It's a proposal. We are working, trying to get legislators in the state of Utah to introduce this. And so what we found is that there are, we think of due process. There are certain fundamental things that that the Bill of Rights says that the government can't do, and lays out specifically, what we have the rights of when we're being accused of a crime, or the government wants to bring charges against someone. And due process is a major part of that, where you're considered innocent until proven guilty, and that you have the right to face your accuser, and that there has to be a warrant before your things can be searched, and on and on and on of these things that you have basic rights to. But the Bill of Rights, the due process, doesn't apply in 2 specific areas of law that we found. There might be more, but we found 2. The first one is tax law, where you have 0 due process, and then in cases where the CPS wants to go after you. And so in cases of CPS, you are automatically guilty until proven innocent. Your accuser can be kept a secret, which is a violation of the Fourth Amendment. Your trial is in secret, which is a violation of the Sixth Amendment. The testimony of a CPS agent is considered as good as physical evidence, even though they've been proven to lie. Your silence is considered actual evidence against you. Your refusal to let them search your home without a warrant is considered evidence against you. Also, you are not allowed, you are prohibited from having a jury trial in these cases. Also, the judge alone is the one that gets to decide. So an agent of the government, after getting testimony from an agent of the government, is the one that gets to decide. Also, the state can keep your children indefinitely, which is a clear violation of the Seventh Amendment. And as I said, the agents of the state are allowed to lie under oath with impunity. And so what we propose is to say, you know what, due process applies here. And what was interesting was that this last session, when we introduced this to the legislator, he's like, wow, that's reasonable. The law applies to everyone. Heaven forbid. And that seems so radical. And so he takes it to CPS to see, are they going to testify against this? And they said, yes, we do not. This is not something that they find reasonable to apply due process to parents. And so when he talked to other legislators, they said, if CPS testifies against it, it's going nowhere. The legislators will vote against it. And so, which is very telling and seems very extreme. I believe that's very extreme that they would say that due process is not something that we can support. And so what we want to do is get a legislator that will just introduce it and let it fail. Let's see who's going to vote no on due process for parents.
Yeah, get them on the, because what I'm seeing here is you have underlined what you're trying to say is parents are presumed innocent until proven guilty. So it shifts the burden, as it should, to CPS to show that you are an unfit parent. As it is now, like you said, if there's the slightest question, again, will we want a second opinion? Does this affect your right to getting a second opinion as well?
This would expand your right to a second opinion, because it would, because right now under state law, they have this farce of a second opinion where they say you can get a second opinion as long as it's from the same type of doctor that gave the first one, and his method of treatment is consistent with traditional big pharma treatment.
So this forecloses the possibility of alternative or more of a naturopathic or homeopathic solution, because
not just that, but like it says that if an oncologist makes the first diagnosis, you have to go to an oncologist for any further second opinion. And when you give, when a guy's got a hammer, he's going to see a nail.
Same thing. Yes.
Yeah, exactly. You're not going to get a non-cancer diagnosis.
Yeah. So,
and what we found in this case is very true, because about a decade, almost 20 years ago now, here in Utah, a guy by the name of Parker Jensen was diagnosed with cancer, and he got 5 second opinions at Primary Children's, and they all said he had cancer. But later on, it was found that he never had cancer. It was all collusion, because they were working on a study and they wanted subjects for the study. And so the idea of getting a second opinion from the same medical field has been proven to be a complete conflict of interest. And what this bill would do, if passed, would give parents the real ability to get a second opinion from the doctor of their choice and from the field of their choice.
You know what's so outrageous, and please don't take this as any way me criticizing what you're trying to do here, because I support it. But the point of the matter is, you shouldn't freaking have to. We should have right already. This is kind of like, and again, thank you for the state of Utah. Texas just did the same thing. Hey, guess what? You can have a lemonade stand. Well, thank you very much. Folks, I encourage you, go to my website, SuzanneCSherman.com, look under suggested reading and read Frederick Bastiat's The Law. Understand what the proper role of government is in society, and we can get away from so much stuff. And shame, shame, shame on Children's Primary for doing this and the way they treated you. You know, all that glitters is not gold. The place is absolutely beautiful. I saw the Ronald McDonald House where they try to accommodate the families, but yeah, okay, you give them a nice place to cook their meals and relax a little bit, and then you clandestinely go around their backs and then try and take their kids. So shame on them. Ben, keep us posted on how this goes along, and
Will
prayers
do.
continued for your daughter
Thank you.
and the whole family. I want to thank you for joining us today. Ben, before you go, how can people follow you? How can they hear your amazing radio show? And how can they support Defending Utah?
Thank you. Yeah, go for all of that. Go to defendingutah.org on the right-hand side of the page. We've got the information on our radio show. Our radio show's on K-Talk AM 1640 every Friday, but it's all podcasted. And so if you just subscribe to our Spreaker podcast, which the link to is again on the radio section at defendingutah.org. That's a great way. And all of our articles, as well as the updates that we'll have on this legislation, you can follow at defendingutah.org.
Thank you very much.
Thank
All
you.
right, I want to change gears a little bit here and bring on our next guest, and that is my good friend Justin Spears. Justin, welcome to the radio show here, Cerberus Radio Network, the Wasatch Report.
It is great to be back. Suzanne, how you doing?
I'm doing great. I'm so glad you're finally here. Congratulations. Big feather in your cap to be published by FEE and 10th Amendment Center. Let's give our listeners the what for. Tell us about yourself.
Yeah, so I'm a public high school teacher here in the state of Indiana. I teach high school social studies, which consists of government, economics, world history, geography, and some social studies electives. I teach a class on the history of music in America. I've been in education now for a little over 10 years. I have a non-traditional teacher background. I have a degree in marketing and worked in the business world for about 5 years before I entered into the classroom. And over that period of time, I've just come to see how coercive the education system in America has become. And so I've kind of turned my attention and passion towards trying to educate people and just wake people up to what's going on in education today.
You know, I see a parallel with what you're doing, because as a teacher, you're working within the system, but yet you're also critical of what it's doing and how it works. I feel the same way with me being a lawyer, because as you know, I'm always saying that the lawyers are a huge part of the problem. You know, the rogue federal judiciary gets its sitting judges from the pool of lawyers who really don't understand the Constitution. So it's kind of problematic to be a member of the group of which you are so critical. But what we are both trying to do is educate people using our experience in our respective fields. So do take what Justin has to say seriously, because he's from the trenches and has a lot to say. Let's start with your first article. It was published in May. And I think Michael wrote this one, The History and Results of America's Disastrous, public school system. And in part one, I think you give the history, and you guys wrote this together. Mike Margison with Justin Spears co-authored this. So let's have you start with this article. I'm going to sip my coffee and listen to what you have to say.
Yeah, so basically what we wanted to do here with this article series, this two-part series. In Article 1, we wanted to kind of give people, you know, we were talking about most Americans, parents will sit back and reflexively say, there's nothing wrong with the school system. Yeah, okay, our test scores may not be great, but, you know, if you live in certain parts of America, hey, we're in a 4-star school, we're an A-rated school with our state. I went through the public school system. I turned out okay. My kids are going to be okay. And so that's about as far as it will go in terms of, you know, reflexively thinking about what is this school system at its core. So what we wanted to try to accomplish in Article 1 is let's go back to teaching people the roots of how we got this compulsory. And that's the word you're going to hear me mention a lot throughout today's episode is compulsion. Forcing, right? The state forcing you to have to attend school. And so we went back and we kind of lay out, where did that come from? And the roots of that in the article, as we spell out, come from a man named Horace Mann, who was director of education in the state of Massachusetts. He went over to, at the time, Prussia to study the Prussian model. And Mike lays out why that happened. And I won't go through all the history of that for time's sake, but the Prussians were kind of reflecting back on why they had just lost a big battle to the French. And one of the things that a lot of their generals said was, hey, we need a citizenry that we can mold and turn into great citizens, right? People who are going to be obedient to the state, that they're going to have this kind of work ethic related to the state, that love of the country, the love of the community. And so how can we accomplish that? And one of the ways that they went through doing that was through the school system. And so there's a gentleman that Mike mentions in the article from Prussia, I believe the last name is Fichte, who kind of talked a little bit about, what they wanted to accomplish over there with kind of, again, getting citizens to be obedient. So Mann goes over and he studies this model and he brings it back to the United States. And so in 1843, that kind of started to take place there. And then throughout time, he comes back into the 1900s. We really start to see this take off after the Civil War. So late 1800s, into the 1900s, we see more schooling become compulsory throughout the country. And at its core, that is very coercive. Obviously, the idea of force, you don't have to think a whole lot about this, should teach you or tell you that when you force somebody to do something, you're probably not going to get very good results. And throughout time, again, we have tried to justify why we have to force kids into schools, why we have to arbitrarily tell them this is the curriculum that you're going to learn. You're going to learn it in this order, in this time frame, in this manner, so on and so forth. And it doesn't take very long before you can really start to see the true evil behind doing that. And that's really what we wanted to kind of spell out in Article 1.
And there's a fantastic quote that's highlighted here that says the motivations at the origins were not pure. They were never to educate, but to nationalize the youth in a particular mold. Is it fair to say that nothing's changed in that regard?
Yeah, no, that's absolutely true. Again, when you look at the history and evolution of education and its intent, at least here, we get sidetracked oftentimes with trivial matters in education, whether it's college readiness or my personal favorite is when you look throughout history, go back to Lyndon Johnson, the Great Society, and probably the one that I put my finger on the most, Ronald Reagan's A Nation at Risk. We as a country have just been foaming at the mouth with comparing ourselves to other countries in terms of education. And it's always, the Chinese are going to eclipse us, or, back then, the Russians are going to beat us, to space, and so on and so forth. And so we just clamor all the time about national rankings or, state to state rankings, here in the United States. And so I think we get sidetracked with that. What has really kind of been, going on inside our buildings throughout the history of education here in the United States is, again, molding kids into being, for lack of a better word, mind-numbed robots. And we accomplish this in a number of different ways, whether it's just look at a typical day inside of an American school. You're told to show up at a certain time. If you don't, you're tardy. If you don't show up within a certain amount of time, then you're truant. If you miss a certain number of days, you're truant. That then can trigger a law enforcement officer to come to your home and look for you and call for you, where the state, as we just were talking about with your first guest, Ben, now you've brought the state in, and now they're exerting control over your child and interfering into your family. The Bell system, obviously, and that's one thing I do say too, that kind of oftentimes gets overlooked, is we like to pick at the government and their involvement in this, and certainly they do take a large share of the blame here. But the industrialists as well played a huge role in molding America's schools. So Rockefeller, Carnegie, in particular, worked very closely with states early on in terms of, what schools should look like to help prepare students for the factory, right? So the Bell system, which is completely arbitrary, right? I mean, imagine, just being, let's say an 11-year-old boy or girl in an American classroom today, and you might actively actually be engaged in learning something, and then a bell goes off or the clock hits a certain time and you're told to stop. I mean, what signal are we sending to that child in terms of teaching them about the love of learning? It's like, no, now you have to stop doing this and arbitrarily now move on to doing something else. And so again, go ahead. Sorry.
Then we complain because they can't pay attention.
Right, absolutely. And we we cram them into desks. for 7-8 hours a day. And when they can't sit still, we say they're ADHD. When they don't raise their hand to speak or put bubbles in their mouth or crisscross applesauce or whatever these silly stupid rules are inside of schools, the teacher doesn't want to deal with it. So they just say, oh, well, that kid clearly has some disorder and needs to be medicated because I want my life to be easy. And I don't want to have to try to actually get to know and love this child to know how they learn and deal with it that way. And again, not all that's on the teacher. You're putting 22, 23, 25 kids under their control at any one time. That's a nearly impossible task, right? So there again, I mean, there's a number of different ways that you can attack and look at the way that school is kind of built. And that is all, again, a part of this foundational understanding of why schools are the way they are. And I just encourage parents, if you're listening out there, to think this through. Don't just react to, oh, well, my school system's fine. My child's an AB honor roll student. There are many, many children in this country that have learned to play the game of school, that school is failing them each and every day. They're bored out of their minds. They would much rather be anywhere other than school.
What I'm seeing now too is we have a push to make kids progress at a pace that is absolutely not in conformance with their developmental capabilities, physically and mentally. I actually got notices sent home because my older son, when he was in junior kindergarten or kindergarten, couldn't skip 50 paces. He couldn't skip. Are you out of your minds? I mean, I had my younger son, they wanted him medicated because he was an active little boy. It was very common for kids in junior kindergarten, 4 years old, being medicated. I want to refer people to an episode we had with Dr. Marianne Block from the Block Center in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. She had a book called No More ADHD. Jeff, we'll have to repost that episode so people can see it. But, the problem is, and this is I want to turn our attention to a moment to an article that you and I were talking about out of Portland. It's called Classrooms in Crisis. And they're talking about the destructive behavior and the disruptions in the classrooms. These kids are outraged. They're having all these problems. And what surprised me was clearly, well, here's the unsurprising part, because the teachers, the legislatures, and the parents, all three of whom are at fault, are coming together to come up with a solution, which of course calls for $4 billion in new education funding. The money we have put into schools obviously has not been enough. Clearly, if we put more in, it's going to be better. They also want progressive and equitable taxation. You can't have both. Sorry. And actually, I submit to you can't have either. They'll also want to improve the student living conditions. So now we're talking about going into people's homes. And because first we have to ascertain what the living conditions are. So, and my question to you, because I think I shared this with you only because I saw you had already shared it. So thanks for that. But here's the thing. Portland is a socialist progressive utopia. Why are the kids so messed up? Why are they so unhappy? Any suggestions?
Well, okay, so I think a couple of things on this, and I kind of read through this article, and I could feel my blood pressure kind of going up here. So one of the things that we kind of our findings, or one of the stances that we take, is the idea of reform in schools. It can't happen. You can't reform. You can't perfect them. You can't reform them because the foundation is broken. I like to use the analogy of building a house, right? So if you're building a house and you're laying the foundation and there's cracks and fissures all in it, it's going to crumble and the entire thing is going to fall apart at some point. Now, you may be able to slap fresh coat of paint on the walls. You may be able to put in new windows, new siding, but at some point, if that foundation is flawed, everything that you're trying to do inside the house is futile. It's all going to fall down. Okay. So think of education that way. Because of this compulsory nature and the evil that does, everything else that you do until you strip that away is futile. All the amounts of money, the billions and billions. And I go through this in Article 2 of our fee set, where I lay out and talk about the money that's been spent on education. God bless them. They want to raise taxes so that they think they can put, and I read some of the quotes from the teachers and former teachers and parents needing more money. It's not going to do it. We get referendums here in Indiana all the time with local school districts that need additional funds for whatever they justify it for, buildings, infrastructure, whatever. It doesn't matter. You might as well just take the money, take it out to an open field, pour a bunch of gasoline on it and set it on fire. So there's that aspect to it. The other thing that they say here, you kind of mentioned that progressive utopia. I think one of the things that they really missed the mark on here, and again, this investigative reporter, Kristen Severance, she doesn't know any better. When she's going to the schools, what are they going to say? Oh, it's the family life. These kids are coming to us with just, they're from poverty-stricken areas, they're trauma-filled lives, maybe single-parent houses, or, maybe in foster care system, free and reduced lunch, on and on and on. But there is never a mention at what blame does the system have for why these kids are so stressed out, why they are acting out in the way in which they are, where they're flipping desks over, cussing teachers out, physically abusing other students and teachers in the classroom. There's no mention of, well, hey, time out. Let's look at this. What does the system have as a role in this? Where are they at in the formula of all this? And that is never really looked at, right? And so when they go through and brainstorm these solutions about, well, maybe if we throw more money at it, or we hire more qualified teachers, or all of that, again, go back to that analogy that I just gave you. It's just futile.
Yeah, and what's so frustrating is it reminds me of Spartans, 7 years old, your kids are ours. Now they want them. What did Hillary Clinton say? We've got to get to these kids early. This is one of the pillars of communism. We've got to get the kids away from the families. We've got to circumvent their values. We've got to substitute our agenda for traditional family values. A scene comes to mind with Al Gore addressing a high school in a gymnasium, saying to these kids, there are things that that your parents don't know, meaning thanks to the the indoctrination of the public school system, you are smarter than your parents. And then during the election cycle for Obama, you had all these high school kids, middle school kids telling their parents, their dim-witted, knuckle-dragging conservative parents, about the virtues of electing President Obama. I had one of my neighbors come up to me and say, hey, what do you think about Bernie Sanders? Like, he was the greatest idea, the greatest thing since sliced bread. And I'm thinking, where did this person from my community come up with this idea? And it didn't take me long to realize, oh yeah, he's got two daughters in the local high school here. So it doesn't even matter where you go with this nationalization of education. We have lost our stronghold because it's only a matter of time, because we are so accepting of this notion that school is where we must send our kids. It's so ingrained in our culture that we forget the compulsory, as you mentioned, nature of the thing. Don't send your kids to school. You're going to get a knock on your door. I had my kids in a public charter school, homeschool, when I was in California. We thought we'd give that a try. And when I opted to pull them out of it, because here's the other thing, the materials, the structure of the situation, and I learned this as a mom of two boys, inherently favors overwhelmingly the psyche, the physical, mental characteristics of little girls. They're the ones that have less of a problem sitting down. They're the ones that like to sit and read books. I had my kids in a private school. Once I took them out of the charter school, what did the teacher we were working with say? Oh, I gave your name to the district. I said, what? Well, the district needs, I said, you turned us in. California's requirements for homeschooling are insane. Go in there, look online, and see what the requirements are with regards to record keeping, having a stupid answering service that has the name of the school. So if people call, you've got to jump through all these hoops. So I jumped through none of them. I did it under the radar. But that brings us into homeschooling, which we're going to get into as a solution. Let's get into the part 2 of your articles here.
Yeah. So then in part 2, we just kind of turn our attention to looking at how this one size fits all approach is really just at its core rotten. And I kind of start off by giving a little bit of background on a speaking engagement that John Taylor Gatto, who was a New York Teacher of the Year, just has some fantastic stuff out there. Books, Dumbing Us Down, Weapons of Mass Instruction. You can find some great things that he wrote about his time in education and why he got out. And he kind of had turned that into his lifelong passion to, again, try to educate people on what this system is doing. And he's talking about California. He's given the story of Jaime Escalante, who was teaching, I think it was calculus at Garfield High School and was forced to resign. And so, what he basically was doing was he was using unorthodox methods for doing it, and the system wasn't going to tolerate that. There's a lot of
yeah, if you haven't seen that movie, it's called Stand and Deliver. It was a great movie. I still remember that Lou Diamond Phillips walking in and, what's this calculus?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. And so one of the things that, as I was listening to Gatto speak, he had a phrase in there that really stuck with me. And it's kind of really driven me in terms of my understanding of what we're up against here with quote unquote reform. It says as in the article that he implored his listeners to understand the real problem and to quit fencing with shadows, is what he said. And that just really, the visualization that just popped into my mind, because, the idea of a shadow, there's nothing there, right? I mean, you see all this action, these people are kind of, fencing and physical, but really nothing's happening. And that's what reform and education is. You've got all of these policymakers, parents, teachers, whatever it might be, money, law, whatever, but it's nothing. It's all a puppet show. And so then I kind of go through, as I mentioned a minute ago, the money end. And as I said, the DOE estimates in 2017 show $69.4 billion compared to the initial $2.9 billion in the initial Elementary and Secondary School Act of 1965. So when you look at that adjusted to gross domestic product, it goes from 2.6% GDP in 1950s to 6.1% as recent as 2010. You've got the state of California spending, I believe it was like $772 million in education themselves. So you've got all that on top of that. Again, I mentioned earlier the industrialist. The industrialist is still around. Carnegie and Rockefeller left endowments. You've got the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. In the state of New York, during the Obama administration, there was a group that formed that tried to help back charters in New York, and they dumped tons and tons of money in from Wall Street money to help back charters in that state. So there's no short of cash. Don't let people fool you. When they start talking about money and things of that nature, it's there. It's just not appropriated appropriately. It's not spent the right way, and there's no accountability, right? It's just, they'll use the human shields of children to say we need more money, but there's never any accountability. I kind of walk through in one of my speaking engagements that I just did recently, talking about all the curriculum that money gets wasted on, all of these programs. When we go back in August, there will be some focal point for the year, and there will be curriculum rolled out to us, curriculum rolled out to the students. Our building that I teach in, we're in what's called a one-to-one district. So every student has a Google Chromebook. That means all the textbooks that have been purchased over the years are now essentially worthless. That's all money, again, up in smoke. So, don't let people fool you thinking that there's a shortage of money in education.
It's just not being spent on the kids. I really came about this. This took me by surprise when I was a parent. I just assumed we moved out into a rural area that my kids would go to the school in the community where we had purchased a home. And once I started doing a little bit of research into it, I realized this is not going to be a very good option for us. So I looked into the private schools as well. And I started doing some research. And that's when I first heard about John Taylor Gatto. And I thought, wow, I had no idea that it was intended intentionally to keep us compliant. We are also, as parents, there is a school in Gilroy, and they all look so now industrialized and institutionalized. There was one of those signs out there that had the electronic announcements. And when we would get out of school early, we called them minimum days. And now I was driving by and I saw this sign and it said early release on Wednesday. What does that harken in your mind? To me, it sounds like they're getting out of prison early. Speaking of prison and the whole even the intimidating appearance of many of these schools. When I was a little girl growing up in San Francisco, they had the juvenile detention facility. It was this big green building, and I remember my mom pointing out a long time back, and she said, "That's where the bad kids go." Well, now it's time for me to start kindergarten, and I heard about how fun school's going to be. Lo and behold, I see my school for the first time. It looked exactly like the building where the bad kids go. I freaked. It was horrible. But the bottom line is you can put the nice paint up like they do at Children's Presbyterian or the Children's Hospital we were talking about in Utah. You can make it as pretty as you want, but that doesn't hide the fact that the system itself is fundamentally flawed. When my boys were in the home-based school, again in the California public school system, the charter school, I had my younger son get some special concessions made for him so he could take longer to participate in the STAR testing. They said, "Yes, we really need them to do this test." I said, "Fine." He needs extra time. He had had some vision issues and he'll need help with the test. He was, 6 years old at the time. So we get there and I come back to pick him up and I said, "How'd he do? Did he get to finish?" Because he was ready when all the other kids were. I said, "He shouldn't be done by now." And you know what I was told? "Oh, he doesn't need to finish. We just needed him here." We just needed a body. Why did they need the body? For the funds. They needed the money. So forget the fact that my son could have had a sense of accomplishment in finishing the test. The bell rang, stop what you're doing, which means it really wasn't that important anyway, which goes back to what you said earlier. What's the message we are giving these kids? None of this really matters because when the clock stops, you've got to drop what you're doing and then get back on. And by the way, the homework, even my son in second grade, we're getting to be like 2, 3 hours a night. And I've said this before, they're trying to disrupt the family pattern, the family connection. This is quality time you can have with your family. And they take it away from you and they break these bonds. And this is very nefarious. And again, this acceptance that this is somehow tolerable and acceptable. I said, "Why are you taking so much time from my kids? I want this time with them. This is my time. They're too young to be spending this time." Why do people accept the fact that they're able to teach their kids how to dress themselves, brush their teeth, tie their shoes? All of a sudden, no longer are they able to do that. We have to turn them over.
Yeah, that's a really important thing, and that's a good segue into talking a little bit about solutions. But before I do that, I just want to circle back to something that you were just talking about, which again, it kind of goes back to the methods of how schooling works. I would say, and I've got two young boys, 11 and 9, the single greatest source of frustration in our lives. And it happens during the summertime too. Now, not so much this year because I was finally able to convince my wife not to participate in the summer bridge book work, which is a hokey made up thing that, oh, if your kids go 2 months without doing, they're going to lose everything that you tried to teach them within a couple of weeks. Studies show anyway. I would encourage people to pick up a book by Dr. Brian Kaplan called The Case Against Education. And he lays out very scientifically how quickly people forget the things that they learn and how much of what you learn in school is worthless anyway. But
I
the
hate
single
program. I hate, hate, hate that program. We didn't have it when my kids were there. That's my time. I remember getting a note from the principal from the private school. "School starts in 3 weeks." And I just tore it. "Then leave me the hell alone until then."
Right. Yeah. Let me enjoy my time. But
Yeah.
yeah, that's our single greatest source of frustration is homework. Worksheets meaningless to the kids. They know it. They pick up on it early enough and know. Last year, my youngest son had multiplication worksheets, and it was just one of those things where every night it was a battle. And inside, I'm going like, if it were up to me, I'd let you rip the thing up and not worry about it. They've absolutely squashed, by they I mean the school, both of my boys' love of reading. When they were pre-K, even first couple years of elementary school, they would love to have us read to them, or they would even try to read on their own. Now, if I try to encourage them to read, it is like pulling teeth. And I'm talking about even reading things that they have an interest in. They just absolutely, because like you said, it's that visualization. They connect it to the reading that they've been forced to do in school, much like you had that visualization with the prison and the school. Now, when I mention books or reading, their mind immediately goes to, I'm going to be forced to read to have to answer a worksheet or do a writing prompt, or I don't care about this topic. I don't want to read this. This is stupid. Why am I doing that? That's what they think of reading now, right? And so take that out to, as they go through years and years and years of schooling, what is that doing to their, like you said, love of learning? Learning is a very natural thing. It is, curiosity is the natural state of the human being. And so when we go into schools, that gets squashed and crushed, and your will is conformed to learning what I tell you to learn, when I tell you to learn it, how I instruct you to learn it. And so, along with that, one last thing before we go into solutions is, of course, even if you strip all that away, right, people learn at different levels. It's absolutely asinine to group kids based off of age and think, this whole idea of, well, no child left behind. Of course, children are going to be left behind, because there are some children that aren't going to learn to read at third grade level until they're, 11 years old. And there's nothing wrong with that. There are all kinds of studies that show late learners of reading or of math or of whatever turn out to be just fine. Your child is not going to be a failure because they didn't pass the third grade reading test. Your child's not going to be a failure because they didn't pass the standardized test in whatever, insert the grade. It's absolutely ridiculous. And the hysteria that the schools build up in the homes and the stress that they place goes right back to what we were talking about with that Portland article. The school is complicit in a lot of this stress and anxiety that our children have. And so then I think that leads into, what can we do about it, right? And that's the last part in Article 2 that I wrote, is on solutions. I want to be very clear when I say this, because I have a lot of people that are friends in education. I obviously have a lot of coworkers. I have other people in my church that are teachers outside of the district that I teach in, who disagree with my position and my stance. I want to be perfectly clear in saying, I'm not calling for the wrecking ball to be taken to your local school. If you as a parent want to send your kid to school and you're fine with that, fantastic, have at it. But don't tell me what to do. Don't tell the state, or i.e. the government, to tell me what I need to do, what's best for my child in terms of their education. If I want to send them to a state-sponsored school, I should have the ability to do that. If I want to send them to an alternative school, a charter school, I should have the ability to do that. If I want to do virtual school or homeschool or whatever it might be, the point is freedom, right? Stripping away the compulsory nature and returning the power back to the family unit to say, this is what works best for us. Okay. My family is a 2 working parent home. My wife works full time. I obviously work, I'm off in the summertime, but that means that we have to have something to do with our children. I would love to be able to step aside and homeschool my children or find a better alternative for them. Right now, we don't have that. We don't have that luxury, okay? So I understand that not everybody's going to have the ability to be able to do what I'm calling for. So again, if you want to have something like this, that's fine. But I'm just saying, give people the opportunity to be able to explore options that work best for them.
And again, it goes back to the thought that you could be put in a cage if your kids miss too much school. When we were going to go on a vacation during school time, and this is again in the private sector, I've had friends whose kids were, in the public schools where the parents were told, no, sorry, you can't take your child on vacation. They wanted to take their daughter on a hunting trip and explain, these are the things she's going to learn. She's going to learn maps. She's going to learn all these things about animals, biology, everything else. And they said, no, that's not good enough. So they had the discretion to determine whether or not the activity was going to be acceptable to them. When we went on a trip, my son's second grade teacher gave him a pile of paperwork to do while we were on our family time. So what did we do? My son did it that whole night, turned it in before we left on the vacation. She was not happy. I am a huge proponent of homeschooling if you can do it. You mentioned unschooling. Maybe we should do a show on that separately. I want to address also your third article. We'll talk more about solutions. But what I found profound, and this really resonated, was when you talk about what the moving up now to so-called higher education is. You have an article called "The Collapse of Academic Standards is a Real Scandal." Not movie stars, not celebrities paying millions of dollars to get their kids into these institutions of higher learning of their choice, these prime choices for schools, Yale, Harvard, you name it, Stanford. You know what? Let them pay that money. These kids aren't learning anyway. What you say here is the victims are the students when the education is to blame, but the kids are going into these institutions of higher education completely unprepared. Case in point, and then I'm going to turn this over to you for the last 10 minutes, is when I went to UCLA, we had orientation. We went down there, they put all of the new students in a lecture hall and taught us how to take notes. Now, granted, I'm old enough that the standards were not that high to get into UCLA at the time, but even then, it was a very respected institution, and they were accepting candidates who did not know how to presumptively take notes. Remedial English classes, algebra classes for all the football players, the athletes that were going there. And they'd even joke around, I'm on the MF plan. All these guys going to the NFL. They knew that they didn't have to take academics seriously because they were just there to play football. And it was okay that they showed up completely unprepared because generating revenue for the school was more important. So go ahead.
Yeah. So essentially, the kind of the genesis of this, and you're absolutely right in identifying, was a lot had been made about the bribery scandal, and as I was reflecting back on that, my thought went immediately to, okay, but what is the target for getting admitted into school? You've got your SAT, your ACT, you've got your GPA from high school, all these other credentials. And I said, what we really need to be doing is looking at that, right? That's the real issue, because each year we are graduating millions and millions of students who are applying to colleges. But let's examine and look at what that data is showing us about how prepared, or in this case, really unprepared they are. By the way, not only for college, but for the workforce as well. I teach in a district where a significant number of students will bypass going to college either off of choice or that they don't have the credentials to get in the GPA or the SAT standardized test scores to get in, and they go into the workforce, and they're completely unprepared for that. So, if the whole point to high school is to prepare students for that next phase of their lives, which presumptively would be adulthood at that point, we need to be looking at what is it that they are graduating with. And earlier I mentioned, that there are a lot of people who go through school and they'll get through high school, where I see them, especially I see a lot of seniors, since I teach government and economics. Our seniors are required to take those two courses, who, again, AB honor roll students, even our valedictorians. When we stop and look at, okay, how prepared are you for this? You just said it, right? They're not. And I linked to a report in here from the Department of Education that kind of talks a little bit about just how unprepared people are in going into schools, where you can see some of the different things that universities have said about the students that are showing up on campus and the lack of skills that students have in going into the workforce. There was a story that I highlighted in the article from 2017, Ballou High School near Washington, D.C., that celebrated every student earning admission to college. And as I say, the problem is the majority of students didn't earn that achievement. It was a hoax. They were pushed through. And you can see chronicled, it was an NPR story where they looked at the profile of these students, and they were missing, just exorbitant amounts of time in school. The grades were just arbitrarily assigned to students in classes. And I kind of tackle that in the article as well, where, teachers, we are compliant in some of that. We push kids through the system. I personally have seen kids have no business walking across that platform at graduation being handed a diploma that says that they are a graduate of the high school. They just have not earned it. It's flat out, they've been pushed through. And the reasoning behind that, you're not going to be shocked by this, Suzanne, but hold on here. I hope you're sitting down, is money. Because Yeah, I know, right? Because much of school funding, at least here in the state of Indiana, I don't know if this is different in other states, but at least here in the state of Indiana, a significant a portion of funding is tied to graduation rates. And so if you are showing that you're only graduating 80% of your students, that's a significant ding in your funding for schools. So we see schools with 97, 98%, or even in this case, sometimes 100% graduation, and that should raise red flags. When you see numbers that high, there's no way that that number of students is going through and actually completing the curriculum, meeting the standards to graduate. Now, of course, obviously we've attacked that, and that needs to be questioned as well. But look, this is where we're at. So if we're going to play the game, we need to play by the rules. So let's look at what this is. And as I said, I have personally seen it. I know it goes on, not just in my district or across the state, but across the country as well, that we are letting these students down. It's not their fault. It's not their fault that we're telling them, hey, good job, you've done this, now you're ready. And then we're sending them out into the quote unquote real world completely unprepared, whether, again, that be for college, 2-year, 4-year, or workforce. It's simply not fair. And we need to have conversations in our communities about how we can correct this issue.
Well, correct me if I'm wrong, but isn't attendance even tied to funding? So if your kids are out, does that affect what the money is that the school takes in?
Yeah, absolutely. Here in the state of Indiana, we do, it's called ADM, average daily membership. There's 2 days, and I think the state even tells the school districts what those days are where they're going to take attendance. And so they will, I haven't seen this here. There was some stories out of Detroit up in Michigan a couple years ago. I had a relative who taught up there who said that they would actually hold drawings for iPods on the days that they knew that the state was going to be doing their attendance metric to get kids to school that day. Kind of like what you were talking about with your son. They don't care. They don't care about educating the child. They want them there so that they can get their money. So yeah, attendance is a large part of that as well. And I teach on a trimester schedule, so 13-week blocks. And I will have kids that will have missed 15, 20 days out of that period of time, and in blocks of time as well. I have had personally students who have missed entire weeks of class, gone on vacation during the school year, which good for them. But in reality, though, what is that doing to them in terms of their academic performance? They're missing a week's worth of in-class instruction, and then we expect them to be able to come back, get all that work done, and keep up with their current work level. And so a lot of times teachers will simply exempt that work from them, not make them do it, and just push them on through.
We kind of got away from the solutions part of the show. I want to finish up as we're running out of time here and see if you can come back and we can talk more about homeschooling and unschooling, because that's something I really want to dig into and not shortchange our listeners and devote the time to that. But, when you talk about the attendance and tying that into the money, we talked earlier about the special needs mentally. What's wrong with these kids? Why is the system getting these kids so upset? Well, look, also mental health. They wanted more mental health experts. The people in Portland are saying we need more mental health experts. And then guess what these mental health experts always say? Your kid needs to be on Adderall or Ritalin or whatever it is. Again, we're going to put up that link to the dangers of those false solutions, because medical tests are never performed on these kids. They're issued very, very dangerous, oftentimes off-label uses for psychotropic medications, and put into a system that, again, is inherently in contravention to what their psyches, their developing brains, need at that time. What happens when a kid, thanks to a mental health, air quotes, expert, says, this kid has ADHD, he's a special ed student? What happens to the district? What do they get when you get such a diagnosis, Justin?
Yeah, so you get additional funding.
Oh,
for that. Right. Absolutely. Shock again. Right. So yes, absolutely. There is there's definitely skin in the game for schools to be able to get that labeling. Also too, then the student gets an IEP, individualized education plan, that again requires more resources for the school, which they're then going to ask for more money. So yeah, absolutely. Again, all of this is tied back to that. And that's absolutely another issue, as I said, with accountability and how money is spent. I do want to wrap up real quick. I would love to come back and talk about solutions. Before I go, I would love to encourage everyone out there, check out Carrie McDonald. You can look for her online. Just Google Carrie McDonald. She writes with FEE. She works with the Foundation for Economic Education. She's got a fantastic book out on unschooling. And I'd love to come back on and talk a little bit more about homeschooling and unschooling options as alternatives to the education system.
Absolutely. I did that with both my boys. And ladies and gentlemen, Justin Spears, we're going to take it back and talk about solutions, real solutions. We just don't complain about problems here at the Cerberus Radio Network. On behalf of the rest of us here, I'm Suzanne Sherman. Thank you for listening. God bless you.